Good evening. Once again, welcome to my home. This is part 3 of a series of discussions about money and political economy. This third segment is called Price, Value, Commodity, and the Factors of Production. It isn't an official Occupy Tacoma statement. It reflects my particular point of view. The majority of Occupy activists, unlike me, are not socialists. My name is Alan OldStudent. I am a blogger and writer, one of the Occupy Tacoma website administrators and editors. My cited documentation is in the downloadable versions of these articles, which you may find on the www.occupytacoma.org website or the www.alanoldstudent.com website. Price, value, commodity, and the factors of production. Here's a recap of what we've talked about so far. 1, it is crucial for us not to accept some economic theory just because someone impressive espouses it. 2, money and wealth are not the same. Money is a medium of exchange, a way to circulate and control wealth, whereas wealth consists of those goods and services that satisfy a human want or need that enable us to live. 3, work or labor is the application of human brain or muscle power either to create a new good or perform a service that satisfies a human need and thus creates new value. So what is the common yardstick we can use to measure value between different goods and services? What did the shoemaker's shoes and the baker's bread have in common that enabled the baker and the shoemaker to agree that 10 loaves of bread have the same value as 1 pair of shoes? How can we measure and compare value? Part of the answer lies in what the buyer is willing to pay, and part of it lies in what the seller is willing to accept after both have considered the cost of production and the amount and quality of work required. For example, the average shoemaker spends 2 years of hard study and an apprenticeship to learn how to make a decent pair of shoes. That makes her labor power more valuable than the labor of an unskilled worker. In calculating the value of her labor, she measures not how much time and effort it takes her personally to make a pair of shoes, but how much time the average shoemaker needs to complete this task. Our shoemaker can't charge more for her labor if she's slower than average. We call this average required for the task, quote, abstract labor, unquote. In setting her price, she also figures the cost of leather and other raw materials. For her part, one tool the baker used was an expensive stone oven. Someone had to roll big, heavy stones down a hill and assemble that oven. That oven, an investment, eventually wears out and needs a replacement. So the baker calculates the cost of wear and tear of baking 1 loaf of bread when setting the price of 1 loaf of bread, as well as the work of grinding flour and baking. Tools aren't the only thing that suffer wear and tear in the process of production. Quite frankly, workers wear out too. Eventually, any economy must factor in the cost of replacing producers who die, retire, or otherwise become non-producers. From this explanation, you surely can see that the cost of tools, of raw material, and of abstract labor power needed to make this item all figure into its price. We call these the, quote, factors of production, unquote. Remember that term. It's very important. To recap specifically what the factors of production include, they are these 3. A, the, quote, instruments of labor, unquote, such as tools, workshops, and so forth that the worker used to create value, create something new out of raw materials. B, the, quote, subject of labor, unquote, which means the raw material that labor power transforms. And C, human, quote, labor, unquote, or work. The application of human brain or muscle power to the subject of labor to create value. So, the factors of production include the instruments of labor, the subject of labor, and labor itself. Let's look at how, quote, labor, unquote, creates value in a bit more depth. A carpenter buys raw materials and turns it into a chair. Supposing the raw materials cost 3 units of exchange money. The carpenter then applies his brain and muscle power to process that material and builds a chair. The chair can now satisfy a need that the original raw material could not. The chair sells for 6 units of currency. 6 units of currency. Labor has added 3 units of new value. Note these concepts. 1. The chair has more value than the unassembled wood, glue, caning, and nails have precisely because it satisfies the human need to sit down, which the raw material lacked. That new utility is what we call, quote, use value, unquote. Use value. 2. The carpenter can trade the chair for something else or for money. It has what we call, quote, exchange value, unquote. Exchange value. Note that for something to have exchange value, it must also have use value or nobody would want it. 3. Surplus value. The carpenter's labor added new value or surplus value to the raw materials when he made it into a chair. So, does all value come from work applied to raw material or to provide a service? Not really. Quite frankly, some things have value but are not the products of human labor. For example, land has value. Air has value because it satisfies a human want or need. We all need air if we are to breathe, but we don't have to work for it. So, if I go to the baker and tell her I'll exchange 5 breaths of fresh air I have stored in a bottle for a slice of her bread, she'll laugh me out of the bakery store. The air has no exchange value, you see, even though it has real use value. But if we live in a desert and I offer to exchange a bottle of water I have gathered for a loaf of bread, we might have a deal. However, if we live in a valley with lots of fresh water and publicly accessible streams, I probably won't be able to conduct that transaction. Although anything with exchange value must also have use value, not everything with use value also has an exchange value. As they say, every well is a hole in the ground, but not every hole in the ground is a well. Here's a new term. Commodity. A commodity is a good or service that has both use value and exchange value. That's the technical definition of the term commodity. Commodities are produced for sale, not immediate consumption. The baker makes much more bread than he or she can eat because she bakes it to sell for money. That's why it's a commodity. But not everything that labor produces and endows with use value is a commodity. For example, if someone like Aubrey bakes his wonderful sourdough bread for the Occupy Tacoma activists who attend a GA or General Assembly meeting, that's a gift. Aubrey applied brain and muscle to the raw material and added a use value, a new value, but Aubrey did not make it to sell. Here's another example. Work done to keep up a home or raise children has use value, although it generally is not sold as a commodity service except by a housekeeping or a child care service. Here's what we have discussed this evening. 1. The factors of production and setting price. 2. Use value and exchange value. 3. Commodity products and services created to sell. Both have a use value and an exchange value. 4. The role of, quote, abstract labor, unquote. Abstract labor. The average amount of labor a typically skilled worker needs to perform a specific task as a factor of production in creating new value and setting price. In our next discussion, we'll talk a bit about how banking likely began. Thank you so much for visiting, and have a good evening.